Now, this story happened when I was teaching English in San Francisco. So I was an English teacher in San Francisco. And most of my students, in fact, all of my students, were adults from other countries, mostly young adults, so people in their 20s usually, who came to San Francisco to do intensive English study. So they came from Asia, they came from South America, and they came from Europe and the Middle East. Those were the main areas, which is most of the world really, that they came from. And the goal of most of these students was to improve their spoken English. Most of these students already knew lots and lots and lots of grammar, too much grammar in fact, and they had already studied a lot of academic English in their own countries. And so what they wanted was experience and improvement with real spoken English. Right? So that makes sense. They came to the United States, to San Francisco, in order to improve their spoken English. Now, what was interesting was that most of the students who came to our school thought that they were already advanced. See, in their own countries, they had studied so much English in schools, in colleges and universities, in conversation schools, and with private tutors. They'd studied and studied and studied and taken all these tests, and everybody told them they were advanced, right? They were using all the advanced textbooks, for example, and they were in the advanced classes back in their home country. But what happened was that when they arrived in America, in San Francisco, they discovered that they could not understand the Americans. For example, they would be at a bus stop, and an American would be next to them at the bus stop and start talking to them. And these poor students would be totally confused and not really understand what the person was saying. And then when they tried to talk, the other person, the American person, didn't really understand them. And it was always a really big shock for these students. They came to America thinking they were advanced, and they discovered that with spoken English, in fact, they were not. Now, with reading, they could do quite well. They were reading very advanced English. They could read newspapers, many of them, in English, like the New York Times, for example, and understand it. Quite advanced vocabulary. But their reading ability was high. However, their spoken ability, listening and speaking, was quite low. So that was the situation. And they would come to my class, frustrated, saying, "Oh, AJ, I thought I was advanced, and I can't understand anybody, and people don't understand me, and I'm having trouble meeting Americans and communicating," and they were very, very upset and emotional about it. And so then I would try to teach them the effortless English system, the system I was developing at that time. Now, at that time, it was new. I was still developing it, still trying some new ideas, but I had most of the general ideas and principles already. And I remember one particular example. And actually, I would say two examples. Two Korean students, Jackie and Jeannie. Now, both of these students, I'd say, were similar level. And they came to my class, and I told them both the same thing. I told them about the 7 rules, for example, my 7 rules of effortless English. I didn't call them the 7 rules at that time, but, I told them they needed to listen a lot and focus on listening first. Don't worry about speaking, just focus on listening a lot. And that they needed to focus a lot on very easy listening. I told them they needed to read English, but not formal academic English. Not textbooks, not even newspapers, but instead to read very easy novels that used common, casual English. I told them to forget grammar, to throw away their grammar books, stop analyzing grammar. I told them to stop worrying about tests. All the things that I teach you in my email course, I told them. Now, the reason I find these two students very interesting, and I find their stories to be interesting, is that each of them did something very different after hearing my advice. One of them, Jeannie, took my advice and basically followed my advice. She started reading a lot of easy novels and books and things. She started listening to my podcast and listening. I was just starting at that time to record some of my lessons, so she started listening to those recordings. And she found other fairly easy English to listen to. She listened a lot. She didn't study grammar. She didn't focus on textbooks at all. The other student, Jackie, did the opposite. See, Jackie was obsessed, totally obsessed, meaning totally focused in an almost crazy way on the TOEFL exam, passing the TOEFL exam. And so Jackie ignored my advice. And instead, what Jackie did was every single day, she studied and studied and studied TOEFL preparation books. She took lots and lots and lots of sample TOEFL tests. She studied tons of grammar, constantly trying to memorize and re-memorize grammar rules. She studied huge, long lists of vocabulary, trying to memorize vocabulary words. And she'd study them again and again and again with tons of flashcards, trying her best to memorize, hundreds of words, thousands of words. She did the opposite, in other words, of everything I advised her to do. She totally did the opposite of the 7 rules. And what's interesting is the results they got. Because after one semester, say 4 or 5 months, Jeannie made progress. She improved her speaking quite quickly. After 4 or 5 months, her speaking had improved a lot. She started to make friends. She went to a church, so she was really religious person. So she went to a church and started meeting lots of American people at the church and talking to them and connecting with them. And she found that she could communicate with them. Because she was doing all this listening, and she started feeling much more comfortable with spoken English. And she made quick progress. Jackie, on the other hand, did not. She came to me very frustrated because after 4 or 5 months, she took the TOEFL exam and she failed. And when I say failed, I mean she did not get the score she needed in order to get into an American university. She wanted to go to a nursing program, to become a nurse in the United States. And to become a nurse, to get her nursing license in America, she had to have a certain TOEFL score. And she did not get it. She did not get that score. So she came to me upset. Oh, AJ, what should I do? I studied and studied and studied. And I studied every day. Took all these TOEFL tests and I didn't pass it. Oh, I'm frustrated. So I said, okay, Jackie, remember what I said. I said, stop taking those TOEFL tests. Get rid of those TOEFL books. And follow my system. You need to read lots of easy novels. I want you constantly listening to English. But not the television, not difficult stuff, fairly easy stuff until you can understand it automatically. Then you can listen to a lot of English that's a little bit more difficult until that becomes very easy, etc., etc. I said, I want you to totally stop thinking about grammar, stop studying grammar, burn your grammar books, burn your TOEFL books. And she was very hesitant. She looked at me like I was crazy. It's like, oh, I don't know. Okay. And then she walked away. Several months passed. And she continued doing the same thing. In fact, I always would see her at the downtown Borders bookstore in San Francisco. They have a little coffee shop in there. And I used to go there a lot and, read books, buy books. And I would always see her in there studying. And every time I saw her, guess what she was studying? TOEFL books, TOEFL test books, and grammar books, and vocabulary lists. So she continued using the same system she had learned in school in Korea. And after several more months, she took the TOEFL exam again, and no improvement at all. Of course, she was taking the new TOEFL exam, which has speaking and listening, a lot of speaking and a lot of listening. It's not just a grammar test anymore. The new TOEFL exam requires a fair amount of speaking and listening, a fair amount of spoken English, real spoken English. Even though the TOEFL test is very academic, the vocabulary is very academic, it's focused on school vocabulary, it still now has a good amount of speaking and listening on it. And she didn't improve her score. And so, of course, what happened? She came back to me again, super frustrated and upset. Oh, AJ, I didn't pass the test again. What should I do? I'm so upset. Oh, my God. And, of course, I said, did you do what I recommended? Because I always see you studying TOEFL books. And she made a lot of excuses. Yeah, but I have to study the TOEFL books. And I said, no, you don't. Studying the TOEFL books is not going to help you. Get rid of those books, do what I tell you, and I guarantee your TOEFL exam score will improve. Now, unfortunately, she never listened to me, at least not while I was at that school, because a few months after that, I left the school, and yet sometimes I would still go by the bookstore down in downtown San Francisco and see her still studying TOEFL books, still memorizing grammar books, still trying to memorize vocabulary lists. And, she just kept doing the same thing and getting the same bad result. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people like her. A lot of people who are stuck in this school mentality, this system, this mentality that they learned in middle school, high school, university, conversation schools, in their home countries, and they're just stuck with this same thing. Study textbooks. Grammar is the key to everything. Memorize vocabulary. Take lots of tests. Practice fake dialogues and drills. Right? This is what happens in schools all over the world, everywhere. And they're just not very effective. They're just not effective for most people. Yes, for a few people, it might work. People who are super analytic and they're super mathematical in their thinking and they just love memorizing. They have like super photographic memories. I don't know, maybe there are a small percentage of people who can use those systems and that way of learning and succeed. But in my experience as a teacher, it's only maybe 5% of the students. The other 95% do not do well using the methods taught in schools. And that's why I felt compelled. In other words, I felt I had to, that I must develop a better system, a new system to help my students. I didn't like to see my students so frustrated. I didn't like to see them so upset. I hated to see them failing again and again and again. I didn't like seeing them coming to America feeling confident that they were advanced, and then discovering that they actually could not communicate verbally with Americans. I didn't like seeing that. I could see they were suffering. I could see they were frustrated. I could see that they were also sick of English and bored with studying all these damn rules and memorization of lists and all that stuff. And I realized that they were not the problem. These were good people. My students were very intelligent. Most of my students were very motivated. In other words, they worked hard. Jackie worked hard. I mean, she studied hours and hours every day after class. So she came to my class 4 hours every day. Then she went home and studied, 3 or 4 or 5 hours more. She was not lazy. She was not stupid. The problem was her beliefs. She was stuck in this school mindset, this school mentality. She was stuck using terrible methods that are not very effective. And she was stuck in frustration. And even though she kept getting the bad result, she was afraid to try something new because all her life she had been taught this one way, that it was the correct way, the only way. And she was afraid to change it and do something different. So whose fault is it? Who's the enemy? Who are the bad guys? In my opinion, it's the schools. The schools are the villains. It's the schools that are causing people to fail. The schools are the failures, in my opinion. It's the schools that fail, not the students. Because the schools are not using methods that are effective, that work. So they're teaching their students years and years and years and years and years. I mean, middle school, high school, and for many students, university too. And for some, even grad school. All these years, and then after all of that, many of these students still do not feel confident speaking English. I mean, that's a problem. That should tell you that something's not working well. It shouldn't be that difficult. But even worse than that is that schools train people to fail. And they teach them beliefs that hurt them later in life. See, the problem is schools really train you to be afraid. They train you to lose confidence. They train you to be afraid of taking risks and trying new things. And all of those things are necessary for success. The two of the main beliefs that most schools teach, not directly, but indirectly they teach these beliefs, are number one, that mistakes are bad and must be avoided. And the other belief is that there's a right answer, one right answer, and then everything else is not correct. If you believe those two things, you will have a very difficult time in your life. You'll have a difficult time being happy, and you'll have a difficult time having really great success. Because they're both lies. They're both not true. And see, Jackie believed both of them. That's why she was afraid to change. That's why she just kept trying the same things again and again and again, never succeeding. See, what do we learn from a very young age in school? We learn that mistakes are bad, right? We are punished for mistakes in school. How are we punished? Well, the most simple way is that we lose points on tests. If you get a wrong answer, -1, -5. Red mark, right? Well, it's quite clear very quickly to any child that, oh, that's not good, that's bad. My parents get upset when that happens, and my teacher obviously doesn't like it, so mistakes are bad. Don't make mistakes. And of course, in school, what is a mistake? In school, a mistake is having a different idea than the teacher. Really, isn't that what it is? Teacher asks a question. If you give an answer that the teacher doesn't agree with, then the teacher says you made a mistake, that you're wrong. And then you get punished, -1, or they just say, no, you're wrong. And for someone who's very young, that goes deep into your psychology. And it continues as we get older, into middle school, into high school. We get embarrassed when we make mistakes. And so by the time you finish high school or university, deep in your unconscious, you have this belief that mistakes are bad, that you must avoid mistakes. And if you make a mistake, you feel nervous, you feel upset, you feel embarrassed, and then you want to avoid that situation. Can you see how that would hurt you in trying to be successful with English speaking? Because when you speak English, if you're not born as a speaker and you come to a country and you start speaking, you will make mistakes. I promise you, you're going to make mistakes when you speak and when you write. In fact, I was born in the United States. I grew up with English my whole life, and I still make mistakes when I speak sometimes. I make grammar mistakes. I make pronunciation mistakes. Many times in these audios, we do not correct my mistakes. I want you to see that it happens. I'm speaking naturally. Sometimes I forget to say the, for example. I'm just speaking quickly and I drop the. Or I drop a certain word. Sometimes I pronounce a word kind of strange because I'm excited and I'm speaking very quickly and I say the wrong word or I pronounce it weird. And then if I recognize it, if I realize I made a mistake, sometimes I'll pause and correct it. Sometimes I just keep going. It's natural. And how did I learn and master English as a small child? As a baby, did I speak perfect English? Of course not. As a child, did I speak perfect English? No. Did my parents smack me or yell at me or criticize me every time I made a mistake as a child speaking English? Of course not. They did the opposite. Whenever I said like a new word or something, they got very excited and happy. Oh, he said that word. That's cool. Wow. And they got excited and I got excited. Right? We don't punish babies for making mistakes. Oh, but in school, suddenly everything becomes so serious and we can't make mistakes. And as adults, we fear this making mistakes. And here's the bigger problem. Because you fear making a mistake, you will avoid situations where you might make a mistake. So in other words, you become more shy as an English speaker than you really are in your normal life when you speak your own language. You become shy about communicating with people. You become shy about chatting with people. You become shy about writing to people, emailing them, or writing on a website or something. And because you get shy and you don't communicate as much, you don't get to listen to other people as much. You don't get as much experience with communicating in real spoken English. And because of that, you learn more slowly. Your fear of mistakes slows your learning. Another thing that it does is having a fear of making mistakes, even a small amount, makes you more nervous, which means your speaking will be worse, right? It kind of, we've all had this feeling. This happens to me in Spanish. I learned a little bit of Spanish in high school, and now I fear making mistakes, and I try to break it, but even though my Spanish is terrible, I get really, kind of nervous about speaking it, even just really simple stuff. And that causes me to speak in a really terrible way, even worse than I normally would. So this fear of making mistakes destroys our lives. And it's not just with English speaking, it happens in all parts of life. A lot of people, for example, want to start their own business. They never do because they are afraid of failing. Well, the risk of failing is always there. I mean, when I started my business, I was afraid to fail too, but I did it anyway. And that's true with anything in life. And school kind of creates this strong fear of mistakes. The other thing that school does is it creates in our brains this idea that there's one right answer. There's one right answer, right? You have a question on the test, and then there's 4 or 5 choices, A, B, C, D. One is correct, and the other ones are wrong. And after years and years and years of taking those kinds of tests, we just naturally, unconsciously start to have that mentality that there are only a few possible answers. There are only a few choices, 4 or 5. And that one of them is correct and the other ones are wrong. Like some students, for example, maybe they don't like my teaching method and they don't agree with my 7 rules. Occasionally, it doesn't happen very much, but very rarely, some student will try to argue with me about it. They'll say, no, you're wrong. We have to study textbooks. This is the way. This is what my teachers told me. This is the right way. And then they wait and they're expecting me to argue with them, right? They're expecting me to say, no, you're wrong. Mine is the right way. But I don't do that because I don't believe there is only one right way handed down from heaven. You know, it's not, that's bullshit. It's totally wrong. Now, based on research and my teaching experience, I do believe that the effortless English system is best for most students, in my experience, about 95%, who want to master spoken English, listening and speaking. However, I never say to somebody, this is the only method and that's it. If someone argues with me like that, and they have this mentality, there's only one right answer, I just tell them, I don't argue at all. I say, I find that this method works best for most students. However, maybe it's not best for you. If you prefer to study vocabulary lists and grammar, if you are improving quickly, if you're very happy with your improvement and your progress, keep doing what you're doing. Don't change anything. If you're getting great results, continue doing exactly what you're doing, whatever it is. It's working for you. That's great. Keep doing it. My system is for people who are frustrated, people who are not happy with the results they're getting from normal methods. Most of my students are not happy about using grammar and vocabulary lists and all of that stuff. They're not happy with the results they're getting. Most of my students have studied using normal methods for many years, but they're still nervous and shy and not very good when they really need to speak English. So that frustrates them. So they're looking for something different because they're not happy with the results they have gotten with normal methods. I'm super happy to teach those students. You're probably one of them if you're listening to this. For the small group who are using normal methods, studying grammar books and tests, and they're just doing great and they're really happy and they're getting fantastic results and improving so much, I just tell them, great, keep doing it. That's fine. If it's not working, you should probably try something else. If it's working great, keep doing whatever you're doing. See, there's not just one right answer, but that's what we learn in school. And so that's why a lot of people, again, when they're trying to speak English, they freeze. They want to say something, but then they just start thinking, how do I say this? And they think in their mind that there's only one right way to say it. Like a lot of students will think, okay, in this situation, I must use the past tense. But the truth is that native speakers might use the past tense. They might use the present perfect. There's several choices, depending on the emotion they want to express, depending on their own sort of perspective. I'm sure all of you know, like, for example, when we talk about the future, we might use the present tense sometimes. And sometimes we might use the future or various versions of the future. And sometimes they're both totally correct. All of them, all the many different ways of saying it, they're all equally correct. It depends on how you want to say it. Each of them has a slightly different feeling. That's the advanced part of it. It can be a little complicated. Each one gives a little bit of a different feeling, a slightly different meaning, but there's not one right answer. I see this kind of thinking sometimes on our member forums. People will pick some sentence from one of my lessons, and they'll have this debate and argument about, well, he used the past perfect here, but he should have used the past, the simple past. And then other people will say, no, the past perfect is correct. And other people will say, no, he should have said the present perfect. And they're all right and they're all wrong. Because the truth is, in some situations, all of those could be correct. I just chose one of them. I didn't think about it. It just happens quickly. When you use your own native language, you're not analyzing it all the time. And yet here they are analyzing one sentence and debating the one answer because they're stuck with this idea from school that there's one right answer. Well, it must be this. You can't have 5 right answers. You can't have 10 correct answers. They can't all be correct. That's what we're taught in school, right? It's this unconscious training we get from school. And so the problem with that is it gets you thinking too much. You take one sentence and you freeze when you want to speak because you're not sure. Is it this one or this one or this one? And then you start thinking of all the rules in your head and, oh my God, and then you're all worried about making a mistake and choosing the wrong one. When the truth is, maybe all of them are correct and it doesn't matter. Just say one of them. So that's why I believe that schools are the enemy. Schools are the villains. Schools destroy confidence. They destroy their students' confidence. That is the worst sin of schools, in my opinion. They make students worried. They make students nervous about using English, trying it. They make students constantly worried about making a mistake or choosing the wrong answer. All of this discourages students from just trying things and using the language to communicate and improving naturally and easily. Because if you get rid of all of that, if you're not nervous, if you're not worried about making mistakes, if you're like a child, just listening and communicating, and that's all you care about, you will improve very, very quickly. But when you start getting into the school system and you get all these ideas and worries in your head and all these analytical methods of analyzing one sentence and trying to debate which grammar tense or which grammar rule is the correct one, what is the right answer and what is the wrong answer, you get all that in your head and suddenly you become really confused and it's hard for you to understand when someone's speaking to you fast, and it's hard for you to just speak in an easy, quick, natural way. So, schools are the enemy. Schools are the villain. All of these problems caused by schools are the reason that I created my own system, the Effortless English System. This is why, because I saw this in almost all of my students, and I could see how unhappy they were, how frustrated they were, how confused they were, and I realized the way that schools are teaching is not working. It's not effective, and in fact, it's harming the students. We have to find a better way. And yes, I believe that the Effortless English System is a much, much, much better way, and most of my students agree. I hope you agree too. And I hope you'll use it, most of all, to improve your spoken English and to enjoy it again. Stop worrying so much about mistakes and stop debating and analyzing about what the right answer is. And just focus on listening and understanding the meaning and focus on communicating clearly your own thoughts and ideas and feelings. And don't worry about the rest of it, because the rest of it will happen naturally and effortlessly. So that's why it's called Effortless English. All right, have a great day and enjoy your English learning. See you again. Bye-bye.